I'd like to bring in Jonathan Sacerdoti, who is a royal expert, journalist, a special correspondent at the Jewish Chronicle. Jonathan, thank you for being with us this morning as we watch the funeral cortege wind its way through the Highlands of Scotland. What's going through your mind today?
Seeing the oak coffin covered with the standard of Scotland there, and the cortege carrying her coffin, leaving Balmoral and passing through Royal Deeside, travelling to Edinburgh and the Palace of Holyrood House, it is quite moving as the first moment that the nation has got to see the coffin itself. And this is, of course, a coincidence in a way that it happened in Scotland, but it was something that was prepared for. There were preparations for decades for what would happen when the Queen did die, and some of those preparations took into account the fact that she spent an awful lot of time there in Scotland. In fact, the Queen had a genuine love and affection for Scotland, and that's something that I think you can see reflected in the crowds that did turn out to see the coffin being driven through the streets there.
Yeah, Jonathan, we're watching this beautiful scenery, and the sun is sort of shining over this part of Scotland this morning. It was very misty and cool here when we woke up in London. And today's journey will end in Edinburgh. So talk to us a little bit about that part of what we're going to see play out today.
Well, we are seeing the Scottish leg of the tour, let's say, of the funeral cortege, of the Queen's cortege, and I think it's important, insofar as it goes through Scotland, that everyone will see from the north to the south. They'll have this opportunity to see the Queen's casket, her coffin being driven through. I think it gives everyone an extraordinary opportunity to pay their respects quietly, as you've seen some by the sides of the road. Others in London will, of course, go and see the coffin laying in state here in Westminster. And then there'll be a massive state funeral, something that we won't have seen anything like in our lifetimes. And that will be quite a spectacular event, which will, again, reflect the solemnity of what's happened, and also just the massive love and respect that British people predominantly have for Queen Elizabeth. I think it's worth saying as well that while monarchies are still seen as something of a curiosity, especially our one, perhaps the most famous one in the world, even those who are Republicans here, that is to say, don't want the monarchy to continue, don't want a queen or king as the head of state, I think even those people tended to have an enormously favourable view of Queen Elizabeth II. She was somebody who seemed, despite that role, to embody Britishness, to embody values that were important in British history, and to somehow bring them through into the British present. And I think that's one of the reasons why the monarchy survived and did so well during her very long reign. And that will be reflected in how people react now during this mourning period, during these 10 days of mourning. I think the fact that people are coming out onto the streets, are laying flowers, the fact that people are just so deeply respectful of her, even if they weren't necessarily monarchists in the first place, shows just what a good job she did. And how tough it will be for King Charles III now, who has to follow in her footsteps, because he doesn't need to replicate what she did. He needs to do his own thing. He needs to find a way to connect with the British people, just as she did, through his own personality. And they have very different personalities. It's worth noting also that she came to the throne very young and was something of a blank page. People didn't really know much about her personal views, and really there was no opportunity for scandal or details of her private life to have got in the way, as happened, sadly, with him. I think there was an enormous amount of intrusion into his life early on, and that means that people know not only what he thinks on various issues that he's been outspoken on, but also intimate details of his own private life. I think that's been damaging to him in the past, but now this is an opportunity, really, for the nation to move on. And as they pay their respects, as we're seeing now, to the Queen, they're also actually coming out, so far it seems, in public, to really support the new king. And it illustrates just how the admiration that she had was, yes, in large part because of her own personality and style, but also, as she always seemed to know, it was a respect for the crown, just as much as, if not more, than it was for her as a person. So the challenge of that role, I think, for her and now for King Charles is to make sure that the personality doesn't eclipse the role. It is the crown that people have the respect for, and the person who wears the crown, the person who is the monarch, needs really to encapsulate the values of that role and to carry out the duties, just as Queen Elizabeth did so perfectly during her very long reign.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Sacerdoti joining us.